What's going on, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, Joker back in once again, and today, people, today we have something a little more serious than our standard fare. Recently, Kevin Yanes, lead sandbox designer for Bungie, was harassed off Twitter. For what, you may ask? Well, Titans will never get air dodge back, my guy. It's part of the Warlock identity. Sorry, but I just want to rip that band-aid off. That did not go over well. Kevin Yanes is no stranger to what I would call bizarre and seemingly out-of-touch takes when it comes to the state of Destiny. This is the same sandbox lead that did not understand the implicit value of freezing someone in a game that was about running and gunning, because his ability to perceive freezing was not as easy as one could perceive a golden gun, because a golden gun just fucking deletes someone. His quote, not mine. Now, I shouldn't need to say this because I'm sure all of my YouTube followers are wonderful and well-behaved people, but it's one thing to hear these takes, or read them, as the case may be, and find that they're out of touch. And I honestly do believe that Bungie as a whole, when it comes to the game's state and the content released, can be catastrophically out of touch with its core player base. It's one thing to be understandably upset about Twilight Garrison never coming back, to voice frustration with that, to disagree with design choices. It's even one thing to point to something a developer said or an argument that they made and say that that argument or that quote is stupid, or to meme on it. It's another thing entirely to attack the person, to wish them ill will or harm, which is entirely unacceptable. And it doesn't help, right? Because I do think that there's a conversation to be had to explore why the community went off the way that it did. This wasn't a couple of people getting mad because an exotic wasn't coming back. This was thousands. Thousands of players don't just snap because everything is G in the H, right as rain in the game, when a developer says, no, you can't have your toy, unless it's a straw that broke the camel's back. That doesn't justify anything. The reaction was still psychotic, and it hurts the conversation more than it helps. Because now I have to preface the entire conversation with, don't harass the developers, don't contact these people, don't engage with them. Kinda derails the conversation, don't you think? And it's sad because there is a desperately needed conversation about how grossly out of touch Bungie is with the player base. And this could have been a great catalyst for it. But instead of having that conversation, I have to voice my displeasure with a community that comes after me in much the same way because of my opinions about the game, and tell them, hey, jackass, it's not okay to tell developers to take a long walk off a short pier. But why did this happen? Is it because suddenly thousands of fanboys became unhinged monsters? I don't think so. Destiny right now is in a weird place. It is once again in the midst of an identity crisis. There is a cycle when content comes out. First, players are hyped, then that hype dies down and the reality of whatever content and objectivity wins through, and people talk about its merits, people talk about its failures. We generally have a good time, and then the content peters out. And you'll note that this kind of always correlates with the next piece of Destiny drama. Season of the Haunted really didn't have a hype cycle, and what people have gotten is a mixed bag at best. The storytelling is amazing, some of the best in the franchise, and it's kind of redeeming one of the worst eras for Destiny narrative. That, of course, being Shadowkeep. And yet, it's everything around the story that is frustrating. Destiny's design philosophy, every season, seems to inch closer and closer and closer ever still to the same design philosophies found in extremely predatory mobile games. I wonder why that is. The world may never know. But there are a lot of systems in this game, like locking players out of progression for a week, or forcing players who don't want to wait into boring, mind-numbing grinds that aren't really that rewarding, all while playing recycled, regurgitated content. I mean, how many horde modes do we need? This is just escalation protocol. The only thing left for Bungie to add to the game before its mobilization is complete is a pop-up that lets you play next week's story mission for $5.99, or you can wait. All of this while chopping up said game and selling it piecemeal. This is a conversation that the community needs to have with Bungie. When is enough enough? But you can't have that conversation if the devs are being told to go commit on Aliven over a fucking exotic. Because that's all the conversation becomes. The Destiny community, at least the vocal internet part of it, seems to have a shorter and shorter temper each season. Season of the Haunted, in my opinion, encapsulates everything wrong with Destiny game design.
But Joker, if it sucks so much, why don't you go play something else?
Okay. Now back to the conversation like reasonable adults. The story this season is wonderful. I've already said this. Everything else, not so much. Where do we start? With the fact that the main event is a public event, or that it's a public event that you can't take your raid team or LFG team into, even though every time Bungie does one of these things, that's a horde mode, not horde mode, on an open world space, the community asks for 6-player matchmaking into these spaces and has done so since year 1? Do we start with how, so far, the story missions are 10 to 15 minute affairs, and it's the same mission, the same exact copy-paste mission, just with new dialogue? Or how about the mobile game-esque weekly lockout from progressing, leaving players either beating their heads against a wall, farming loot chests, or playing the same repetitive horde mode that we've seen copy and pasted and reskinned for the better part of 4 years? Or how about once you've made the journey to collect all your new shiny loot, that there's really nothing to do with it? The new endgame activity was sold separately, and large portions of the Destiny community don't play PvP. So once you get your new loot, what do? You run the same fucking strikes you've been playing for the last 5 years. But why? Why are you doing that? For more loot? So you can continue playing the same handful of strikes you've been playing for the last few years? Over and over and over and over again? Or do we talk about Solar 3.0? I mean, sure, Solar 3.0 is getting some fixes, but if players still don't like it after these fixes, well, they're just shit out of luck. Bungie's already said so. Now, I have no horse in that particular race because, at best, I think Solar 3.0 is misunderstood by the community, and at worst, it's just part of Bungie nerfing the overall power fantasy of the game. And I've not played it enough to really have an opinion, but I wasn't a fan of what I played. It just seemed unintuitive. Or do we talk about Rift, the first new PvP mode in forever? Something people have been asking for years, and it releases half-baked. Don't get me wrong, I actually really liked the mode, but there's no arguing it didn't ship half-baked. We are only a couple of weeks into the season, and it already feels dry. Like, nobody knows how dry I am. Dasani water in the desert dry. Because there's not anything here. A lot of Destiny's issues comes from the fact that the game is not flavor of the month, flavor of the week. It's barely flavor of the moment. The ooh shiny for 5 minutes. The parasitic design that has infested this game has removed its longevity, and because of that, players find themselves becoming frustrated quicker and quicker and quicker with each passing season because they're sick and tired of a glorified mobile game. But that doesn't mean players have free reign to wish devs bodily harm. That's disgusting. The Twilight Garrison issue, in my opinion, is a flashpoint moment. I don't really think that this is about Twilight Garrison. It's about frustration with a game that spends more time bad than good in many players' eyes. With a game that we're always having to make excuses for because the potential for it to be amazing is there, because the gunplay is amazing, because playing Destiny is fun when it's good. There's a lot of players that clearly love and care about this game, but are sick of watching it become more and more like a mobile game, as pleas from players seemingly fall on deaf ears, at least until an issue reaches critical mass, and it may hurt Bungie's bottom line, so Bungie can't ignore it. If we look at the argument presented over Twilight Garrison, it should never have been,
Titans will never get back their dodge! My guy, it's part of the Warlock identity. Sorry, but I want to rip that band-aid off.
That argument is instantly inflammatory, even if the developer did not mean it to be. It leaves tens of thousands of people instantly disappointed, with no real catharsis or outlet for that disappointment. And it leaves those tens of thousands of people feeling like their opinion on the matter is invalidated, because Bungie didn't engage with the practical arguments against the return of Twilight Garrison. Instead, they rely on some esoteric design philosophy that's not even consistent throughout the entire game. People will read that and rightfully say, how can air dodge be a Warlock identity? It started off as a Titan exotic. In fact, flying and being airborne is very much part of the Titan identity. We have an entire class with a super and a melee about flying across the map. We have Lion's Ramparts. In Destiny 1, we had Imperium Bellicose and Twilight Garrison. It just feels like the worst argument he could have made. The argument that Kevin puts forward is flawed, and it seems very dismissive. And while I'm certainly not one to tone police, I mean, come on. When you know you're about to drop a bomb like that will disappoint tens of thousands of people, perhaps something a little less flippant than nonsensical, esoteric design philosophy that changes on a whim based on whomever's in charge that day was probably not the best foot forward. It just comes off tone deaf. People have wanted the return of Twilight Garrison for the entire lifespan of Destiny 2, and to categorically dismiss the return of the exotic while not engaging in the arguments of, well, here's actually why it shouldn't return, creates an unnecessary level of disappointment. Because, and this might seem like a weird segue, but why do people want Twilight Garrison back? Titans want Twilight Garrison back because they feel like they're at a disadvantage in PvP, because unlike Warlocks and Hunters, Titans don't really have a press X to disengage option. People love to point to Shoulder Charge as some all-in-one counter-argument to this, but Shoulder Charge only matters if you're already in motion. It requires a wind-up. It's nowhere near as reactionary as the other movement options, as you already have to be disengaged and running away for it to even matter. A lot of players will also point to the fact that they just want the movement option. They don't think that they're asking for anything insane like the other classes get out of jail free cards that give you healing, invisibility, disorientation, more dodges, weapon reloading, weapon stat bonuses, mini bombs, damage resistance, bonus accurate, ability refund, slowing and or freezing opponents. They just want the dash back that they had in Destiny 1. And we can disagree with that argument. I certainly have no horse in the Twilight Garrison race. It was never my thing, clearly. Now, in my opinion, a better argument than,
Well, it's just the Warlock thing now.
would have been to say, look, we just nerfed Stompies. We don't want another Stompies. It would be a developmental bottleneck for the entire class. When it comes to future exotics, it's the Stompy problem. Why develop anything cool when Stompies exists? Do we want to get Twilight Garrison back just for it to be a nerfed version of what we had in Destiny 1? Or for it to be around a couple of seasons and then get nerfed into the ground because it's the only thing Titans use? No. Let's just not waste the dev time. And I think that argument is a much better way to approach not bringing Twilight Garrison back to Destiny. Instead of just saying, well, you know, now it's arbitrarily just Warlocks, you don't get your favorite thing, suck it. Because it rings hollow in a game that has had cross-pollination of classes since we started the 3.0 subclasses. So it just comes off like you're not listening or you don't care. This, combined with a community that I think is burnt out by the seasonal model, was a tinderbox waiting to go off. Now, those situations do not excuse anything that was done. If anything, what was done hurt the conversation. It made it harder to have. But yeah, like I always say in these videos, don't harass devs, don't contact them, don't message them. Anyways, those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Remember to like, but only if you did, subscribe for more. Feel free to donate to my Patreon if you're feeling particularly generous. But above all else, stay frosty.